Silence fell across the grand chamber of the Galactic Council as Ambassador Sarah Chen stepped forward, her boots echoing against the polished crystalline floor. 200 alien species, represented by their most distinguished diplomats, stared down at her from their elevated seats. Some whispered behind translucent appendages, others clicked their mandibles in disapproval, but all eyes were fixed on the lone human representative. "Distinguished members of the Council," Sarah began, her voice steady despite the tension in the room, "I understand your concerns about humanity joining the Galactic Federation. Yes, we're young. Yes, we're unpredictable. But I stand here today because of an incident that I believe proves we bring something unique to this assembly." The council chamber's ambient lighting shifted to a deep purple, a sign of collective skepticism. High Counselor Zixtal, their crystalline form refracting light in complex patterns, leaned forward. "Ambassador Chen, we have reviewed the incident report from Station Delta 7. Your actions were—" They paused, searching for the right word, "unprecedented." Sarah couldn't help but smile, remembering that day 3 cycles ago. She had been touring the station's Xenozoological Research Facility when alarms blared through every deck. A Nexarian shadow beast, one of the most feared predators in the known galaxy, had escaped its containment field. The facility's staff had evacuated in panic, leaving behind valuable research and even more valuable lives. The shadow beast stood 3 meters tall at the shoulder, its obsidian scales absorbing light like a black hole. 6 eyes glowed with bioluminescent fury, and retractable claws could slice through reinforced bulkheads like butter. Evolution had perfected this creature into the ultimate killing machine, feared across 12 star systems. "The security footage speaks for itself," Sarah continued, gesturing to the holographic display materializing in the chamber's center. "While others fled, I saw something in those eyes, something familiar." The footage played, showing Sarah walking slowly toward the creature. Several council members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, some covering their sensory organs. They all knew what shadow beasts were capable of. Entire colonies had been abandoned because of single specimens. On Earth, we have a saying: every creature, no matter how fierce, seeks connection. Sarah's voice softened as she watched her recorded self reach out toward the beast. "We've spent thousands of years domesticating predators, learning their language, earning their trust. From wolves to big cats, we discovered that sometimes the most dangerous creatures are simply the most misunderstood." The footage showed the moment that had shocked the galaxy. As Sarah stood before the shadow beast, she didn't reach for a weapon or a restraining device. Instead, she held out her hand, palm up, and waited. The massive creature lowered its head, all 6 eyes fixed on this tiny human who showed no fear. "Stop the footage," demanded Representative Clerics of the Arthenian Collective, their antennae twitching frantically. "We all know what happens next, and it defies all logical explanation." But Sarah gestured for the playback to continue. The council watched in renewed disbelief as the shadow beast, this apex predator that had terrorized space lanes for centuries, pressed its scaled snout against Sarah's hand. The creature's bioluminescent markings shifted from aggressive red to a calm blue, and a sound never before recorded from their species emerged: a deep, rumbling purr. "What you call defying logic," Sarah said, her voice filling the stunned chamber, "we call compassion, understanding, the willingness to see beyond fear and find connection, even in the most unlikely places." The footage ended, freezing on the image of human and beast, 2 species separated by light years of evolution, sharing a moment of unexpected peace. The council chamber remained silent, but the ambient lighting had shifted to a curious shade of green, the color of new possibilities. "The question before you isn't just whether humans are ready for the Galactic Federation," Sarah concluded, her gaze meeting each council member in turn. "The question is the Galactic Federation ready for what humanity can teach you about connecting with the unknown?" As murmurs filled the chamber and debates erupted among the representatives, Sarah stood her ground. But before High Counselor Zixtal could respond, emergency alerts flashed across every screen in the chamber. A situation was developing on the station's lower levels. Something had broken free from containment. Something big. The color drained from several council members' faces as they read the alert. Another shadow beast had escaped, but this one was different. This one was angry. The emergency lighting bathed the council chamber in an ominous red glow as sirens wailed throughout the station. Sarah's diplomatic composure cracked for just a moment. She knew exactly which shadow beast had escaped. It was the male they'd brought in last cycle, nearly twice the size of the female she'd managed to calm. The one that had destroyed 3 containment fields during capture. "High Counselor," Sarah said, her voice cutting through the growing panic. "Let me help. I've done this before." "Absolutely not." Zixtel's crystalline form pulsed with urgent colors. "The first incident was already beyond protocol. This specimen is—" They paused, their translator struggling to convey the gravity of the situation. Different. Security feeds flickered across the chamber's holographic displays, tracking the beast's path of destruction through the station's lower levels. It moved with frightening intelligence, systematically disabling security checkpoints rather than simply smashing through them. This wasn't blind rage. This was calculated. With all due respect, Sarah stepped forward, her voice steady despite the chaos erupting around them. "Your conventional containment methods clearly aren't working. How many more lives will be risked before you're willing to try something new?" Representative Clerics chittered nervously, their antennae twitching in agitation. "The human has a point. Our traditional approaches have failed twice now. Perhaps. This is precisely why humanity isn't ready for Federation membership," interrupted Ambassador Vorn of the Mechanoid Collective, their metallic voice resonating with disapproval. "They rely on primitive intuition rather than proven methodologies. They're reckless." The chamber shook violently, cutting off Vorn's protest. The beast was moving upward through the station, heading straight for the council chamber. Sarah couldn't help but wonder if it somehow knew, if it could sense the presence of so many powerful beings gathered in one place. "Your proven methodologies just failed again," Sarah pointed out, keeping her voice carefully neutral. "But there's something else you should know about the incident with the female beast, something that wasn't in my official report." The chamber fell silent, even the warning sirens seeming to dim as hundreds of alien eyes focused on Sarah. High Counselor Zixtel's crystalline form shifted to deep indigo, a color Sarah had learned indicated intense curiosity. "When I touched her mind," Sarah continued, choosing her words carefully, "I felt something. These creatures aren't just animals. They're intelligent, possibly even sentient, and they're angry because—" Another explosion rocked the chamber, closer this time. Status displays showed multiple hull breaches on the levels below. The beast wasn't just destroying the station, it was herding everyone upward, using the station's own emergency protocols against them. "Ambassador Chen," Zixtel's voice carried the weight of centuries of leadership. "What exactly are you suggesting?" Sarah took a deep breath. What she was about to reveal would either earn humanity immediate Federation membership or get her permanently banned from Council space. 3 months ago, Earth's deep space arrays picked up something unusual. Patterns in the background radiation of Sector 847, where shadow beasts were first discovered. It took our linguists weeks to decode it, but when they did, the chamber's main doors groaned, their reinforced alloys buckling under immense pressure. They had minutes, maybe seconds. The patterns were language. Sarah pressed on, speaking faster now. Not just any language. It was similar to whale song from Earth's oceans. The shadow beasts aren't just intelligent. They're a spacefaring species, or at least they were before. The doors exploded inward, and the shadow beast entered the council chamber, standing nearly 4 meters tall, its obsidian scales rippling with barely contained power. It was magnificence and terror incarnate. But Sarah saw something else in those 6 gleaming eyes, something that changed everything she thought she knew about these creatures. Recognition. The beast's bioluminescent markings pulsed in a complex pattern, one that Sarah had seen in those deep space recordings. It wasn't random aggression driving these attacks. The shadow beasts were looking for something. Something that had been taken from them long ago, something that the Council's oldest members might remember, if they dared to look back far enough in their history. As panic erupted in the chamber, with council members scrambling for emergency exits and security forces charging in with weapons raised, Sarah made her decision. She stepped forward between the beast and the council and began to hum a specific sequence of tones, the same pattern they detected from Sector 847. The beast froze. Its bioluminescent markings shifted from aggressive red to a color Sarah had never seen before, a deep, swirling purple that seemed to contain galaxies within its depths. 6 eyes fixed on her with an intelligence that no containment field could ever hope to hold. And then it began to respond, its deep, resonant tones vibrating through the chamber's crystalline architecture, telling a story that would shatter the Galactic Federation's understanding of its own history. A story of a species that had sailed between the stars when most of the council races were still learning to make fire. A species that had been betrayed, imprisoned, and reduced to mere beasts in the Federation's carefully curated databases. High Counselor Zixtol's crystalline form had gone completely still, reflecting the beast's bioluminescence in a way that seemed almost guilty. They knew something that had been hidden for generations. The shadow beasts weren't discovered in Sector 847, Sarah said quietly, never taking her eyes off the massive creature before her. They were imprisoned there. The question is, why? The beast's markings pulsed again, and Sarah realized with growing horror that she understood what it was saying. The truth about the shadow beasts, about Sector 847, about the very foundations of the Galactic Federation. It was all connected to a decision made thousands of years ago, a decision that the Council's ancestors had believed necessary for the greater good of the galaxy. But as Sarah stood there, watching ancient history unfold through the beast's complex patterns of light and sound, she realized that humanity's role in the Galactic Federation might not be what anyone had expected. They weren't here to join an existing order. They were here to help right an ancient wrong. The beast lowered its massive head until it was eye level with Sarah, all 6 of its glowing orbs focusing on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. In that moment, she understood that her next words wouldn't just determine her fate, or even humanity's fate. They would determine the fate of 2 civilizations that had been locked in a dance of hunter and hunted for far too long. The council chamber had gone completely silent. Hundreds of representatives watching as human and beast faced each other in a tableau that would be remembered for generations to come. The only sound was the soft hum of the station's failing systems and the rhythmic pulse of the beast's bioluminescence, counting down to a decision that would change everything. Sarah opened her mouth to speak, knowing her next words would either bridge an ancient divide or spark a conflict that could tear the galaxy apart. But before she could utter a sound, another alarm blared through the chamber, proximity warnings. Something massive had just emerged from hyperspace directly above the station. The beast's markings shifted again, and this time Sarah didn't need any translation to understand its message. They weren't alone. The rest of its kind had finally found them, and they were here to reclaim what was taken from them so long ago. The real question was, would the Galactic Federation face its past with courage, or would ancient fears drive them to repeat the mistakes that had led them here? As the station's external cameras showed more shadow beasts emerging from hyperspace, dozens, then hundreds of them, their massive forms blocking out the stars themselves, Sarah realized that her simple act of compassion toward a single creature had set in motion events that would reshape the galaxy. The beast beside her began to glow brighter, its markings shifting into patterns more complex than any she'd seen before. It was sending a message to its kind, and somehow Sarah knew she was part of that message. Humanity, in all its reckless compassion and stubborn optimism, had accidentally stumbled upon a truth that the Federation had buried beneath millennia of careful diplomacy and selective memory. High Counselor Zixtol finally moved, their crystalline form catching and refracting the beast's bioluminescence in a kaleidoscope of ancient promises and broken treaties. Ambassador Chen, they said, their voice heavy with the weight of history, perhaps it's time we told you the full truth about the shadow beasts and why the Federation's founders believed their containment was necessary for galactic peace. But as the station's sensors registered more arrivals, as the sky above them filled with beings that had waited thousands of years for this moment. Sarah wondered if anyone was ready for the truth that was about to be unveiled. The beast beside her let out a low, resonant tone that made the chamber's crystalline walls sing in harmony. It was a sound of anticipation, of long-awaited justice, of change that could no longer be contained by any field or protocol. And somewhere in the vast darkness of space, more of its kind were answering that call. The chamber's crystalline walls seemed to pulse with the combined bioluminescence of hundreds of shadow beasts now surrounding the station. Sarah could feel the weight of history pressing down on her shoulders as High Counselor Zixtal's form shifted through shades she'd never seen before, colors that spoke of guilt, fear, and something deeper, something ancient. The founding war, Zixtal began, their voice resonating through the chamber. That's what our oldest records call it. But like so many things written by the victors, the name itself is a deception. There was no war, Ambassador Chen. There was only prevention. The beast beside Sarah let out a low, harmonic rumble that made several council members flinch. Its 6 eyes never left Zixtal as the High Counselor spoke, each word seeming to carry the weight of millennia. When the first council races achieved faster-than-light travel, we found a galaxy already shaped by their influence. Zixtal gestured to the beast. The shadow beasts, or as they were known then, the luminous ones, had seeded thousands of worlds with their bioorganic technology. Technology that could reshape planets, redirect stellar radiation, even alter the fundamental forces of space-time itself. Sarah's mind raced as she processed this revelation. The beast's markings pulsed in patterns that seemed almost sad, not angry, as she'd expected, but mournful. "You were afraid of them," she said softly, understanding dawning in her eyes. "We were terrified," admitted clerics, their antennae drooping. "Our civilizations were young, just learning to reach for the stars, and we found ourselves in a galaxy where another species could reshape reality itself. The power they wielded, it seemed godlike to us then." The main viewing screen showed more shadow beasts arriving, their massive forms moving with impossible grace through the void. Sarah estimated there were nearly 1,000 now, forming a sphere around the station that grew more complete with each passing moment. "So you struck first," Sarah concluded, her voice tight with controlled emotion, "before they could become a threat, before they could decide your fate for you." "We used their own technology against them," Zixtal continued, their crystalline form dimming with shame. "Our scientists had discovered that certain frequencies could disrupt their higher cognitive functions, reducing them to what you see in the databases. We deployed the weapon simultaneously across all their worlds. In a single day, we ended what we believed was an existential threat to our freedom." The beast beside Sarah moved then, its massive form flowing like liquid shadow until it towered over Zixtal. But instead of attacking, it began to generate complex patterns of light and sound, a language older than the Federation itself. Sarah found herself translating without conscious thought, the patterns matching those discovered in Earth's deep space recordings. "They weren't preparing to conquer you," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "They were preparing to leave." The chamber erupted in shocked murmurs as Sarah continued. The bioorganic technology, the planetary engineering. It wasn't about power or control. They were terraforming ships, weren't they? Generation ships. They knew something was coming, something that threatened all life in the galaxy. They were building Orcs. The beast's markings pulsed in confirmation, and suddenly Sarah understood the true magnitude of what the Federation had done. They hadn't just imprisoned a species. They had potentially doomed the galaxy by stopping the shadow beasts from completing their work. "High Counselor," Sarah's voice cut through the growing chaos in the chamber. "What exactly did your scientists find in Sector 847? What were the shadow beasts trying to protect us from?" Before Zixtal could answer, every screen in the chamber blazed to life with new sensor data. Something massive was emerging from hyperspace at the edge of the system, something that dwarfed even the gathered shadow beasts in scale. The beast beside Sarah began to glow with an intensity that made the chamber's crystalline walls crack under the strain. Its markings shifted into patterns so complex that Sarah's mind struggled to process them. but one message came through with terrifying clarity. They're here. The station's artificial gravity fluctuated as space itself seemed to bend around the approaching object. It wasn't a ship, at least not in any conventional sense. It was as if a piece of the void had decided to move with purpose, trailing streams of dark matter in its wake. The threat they foresaw, Zixtal whispered, their crystalline form vibrating with fear. It's finally arrived. The beast turned all 6 of its eyes to Sarah, its markings forming patterns that spoke of choices and consequences, of mistakes that could still be unmade, of hope that burned brighter than fear. In that moment, Sarah understood that she stood at a crossroads not just for humanity or the Federation, but for all life in the galaxy. The station's sensors screamed as more void things began to emerge from hyperspace, their very presence seeming to unravel the laws of physics. The shadow beasts moved in perfect synchronization, forming geometric patterns around the station that Sarah somehow knew were more than mere formations. They were beginning to recreate the bioorganic technology that had been stolen from them so long ago. They needed time to complete their work, time that only the Federation could give them, by admitting their ancient mistake and choosing to trust those they had once feared. Sarah looked at High Counselor Zixtal, then at the void things approaching with inexorable purpose, and finally at the beast beside her, a being whose species had spent millennia in imprisoned isolation, yet still chose to protect those who had wronged them. The choice seemed crystal clear, but as she opened her mouth to speak, to try to bridge thousands of years of fear and mistrust in mere moments, the void things made their first move. Reality itself screamed. The scream of reality tore through the station like a physical force, shattering every crystalline surface in the council chamber. Sarah fell to her knees, her hands pressed against her ears, but the sound wasn't just audible. It resonated through her very atoms, as if existence itself was being pulled apart at the seams. Through tears of pain, she saw the shadow beast's markings shift to pure, blinding white. It moved with liquid grace, its massive form curling around her protectively as fragments of the chamber's architecture rained down around them. The other council members weren't so fortunate. Their various physiologies reacted violently to the reality-warping scream. Some collapsed, others began to phase in and out of normal space-time, their forms becoming transparent then solid in nauseating pulses. The void things, High Counselor Zixtal managed to say, their crystalline form cracking under the strain. They're not attacking the station. They're attacking causality itself. Sarah forced herself to look at the main viewer, still somehow functioning despite the chaos. The void things had arranged themselves in a pattern that hurt to look at, a geometry that shouldn't be possible in three-dimensional space. Where their dark matter trails intersected, reality simply ceased to exist, not destroyed, but retroactively erased from the timeline. The shadow beasts, Sarah gasped, understanding dawning through the pain. They weren't just building arcs. They were building anchors, points of absolute stability in spacetime. The beast wrapped around her pulsed in confirmation, its markings forming patterns that spoke of an endless war fought across dimensions. The void things weren't invaders in the conventional sense. They were entropy given consciousness, seeking to unravel the ordered universe back into primordial chaos. But before Sarah could process this revelation, something even more impossible happened. The beast's markings suddenly shifted to a color she had never seen before, a hue that existed somewhere between ultraviolet and thought. And in that moment, she heard its voice not in patterns of light and sound, but directly in her mind. Your species, it said, its mental voice carrying echoes of ancient stars and deeper mysteries, you have something we lost, something we need. Through their unexpected mental connection, Sarah saw flashes of human history from an alien perspective. Our art, our music, our poetry, our endless capacity to create meaning from chaos, to find patterns in randomness, to impose order through sheer force of imagination. The bioorganic technology, she whispered, it was powered by creativity itself, wasn't it? By the ability to imagine new forms of order. Yes, the beast confirmed, its mental voice tinged with something like hope. When your armies fight, you sing. When your worlds burn, you create art. When faced with the void, you tell stories. This is what we lost when the Federation tried to save themselves from a threat that never existed. The station shuddered as another wave of unreality washed over it. Through the viewer, Sarah watched in horror as entire sections of space simply ceased to have ever existed, taking with them countless stars and worlds. The void things were unmaking creation itself, one sector at a time. But then she noticed something else. Where the shadow beasts' formations intersected the void things' geometry, reality held firm. Their bioluminescent patterns, now coordinated across hundreds of individuals, were somehow anchoring existence itself. We can reactivate the planetary engines, the beasts communicated urgently, rebuild the network that would have saved everyone. But we need what your species has. We need humanity's chaos, its creativity, its reckless ability to imagine impossible futures. Sarah looked around the chamber at the representatives of 200 species, all facing extinction not through violence or conquest, but through the simple unraveling of existence itself. The Federation had spent millennia afraid of the shadow beast's power, never realizing that power was meant to preserve life, not end it. But before she could respond, the station's sensors detected a new anomaly. Something was emerging from hyperspace, not with the reality-bending presence of the void things, but with a familiar signature that made Sarah's heart skip a beat. "That's impossible," Zixtal whispered, their damaged form barely able to process the sensor data. "Those are human ships, hundreds of them. But how? Your species doesn't have a fleet of this size." Sarah stared at the readings in disbelief. The ships were definitely human in origin, but they weren't military vessels or colony ships. They were radio telescopes, orbital arrays, scientific outposts, all the infrastructure humanity had built to listen to the stars, torn from Earth's orbit and somehow converted into something new. Something that pulsed with the same bio-organic patterns as the shadow beasts themselves. The beast's mental voice carried a note of awe. "We left seeds," it explained, hidden in the background radiation and the very music of the spheres. "We hoped some species would hear them, would understand what they truly were. Instructions for awakening the dormant potential in all thinking beings. Your people didn't just hear our seeds, Sarah Chen. You sang back to them." Through their connection, Sarah saw the truth. Every radio signal humanity had ever sent into space, every poem broadcast to the stars, every piece of music transmitted into the void. They had been unconsciously activating ancient protocols buried in the very fabric of space-time, preparing for this moment. But as the human ships took up position alongside the shadow beasts, as two species separated by unimaginable gulfs of time and space prepared to fight entropy itself, a new sound cut through the chaos. It came from everywhere and nowhere, a laugh that made Sarah's blood run cold. The void things weren't just mindless forces of entropy. They were conscious, aware, and they had been waiting for exactly this moment, when all their opponents would gather in one place, trying to preserve a universe they had already lost. That laugh echoed through dimensions Sarah didn't know existed, a sound that spoke of patience measured in eons. Through her mental link with the shadow beast, she felt its sudden surge of recognition and fear. "They let us find the seeds." The beast's mental voice carried a note of horror. "They let your species awaken them. They wanted us to gather." The void thing's geometry shifted, forming a pattern that seemed to draw the very light from space itself. Their dark matter trails wove together into a lattice that began to encompass not just the station and its defenders, but the entire star system. But as despair threatened to overwhelm her, Sarah noticed something peculiar about the human ship's formations. They weren't taking defensive positions like the shadow beasts. Instead, they were arranging themselves in patterns that seemed random, chaotic, yet strangely familiar. "Musical notation," she whispered, understanding Donnie. "They're arranging themselves like notes on a staff." The beast's markings pulsed with sudden comprehension. Your species' greatest strength, it communicated urgently. You don't just impose order on chaos. You find beauty in it. You turn randomness into art. Through their connection, Sarah saw what needed to be done. The void things existed to unmake patterns, to return everything to primordial chaos. Fighting them with perfect geometric formations, no matter how powerful, was exactly what they expected, what they had waited for. Everyone. Sarah's voice cut through the chamber's chaos. The human ships, they're not just taking combat positions. They're turning space itself into a musical instrument. We need to do something completely illogical, completely unpredictable. We need to dance. The shadow beast's markings shifted through colors that had no names as it grasped her meaning. One by one, the massive creatures began to break their perfect formations, moving in spirals and loops that followed no mathematical pattern. Their bioluminescence pulsed not in coordinated signals, but in the rhythm of human heartbeats, of jazz improvisation, of children's laughter. The Void Thing's lattice faltered as it tried to predict and counter these movements. How could it unmake patterns that weren't patterns at all, but pure expressions of joy? High Counselor Zixtol's crystalline form began to vibrate in harmony with the human ship's emissions. Other council members joined in, each adding their species' unique voices to the growing symphony of chaos and creation. The station itself groaned as its crystalline architecture resonated with frequencies that existed somewhere between music and mathematics. Sarah felt the beast's consciousness merge more fully with her own, showing her visions of what its species had originally intended, not just generation ships, but a galaxy-spanning network of creative potential, turning the very music of the spheres into a shield against entropy. The Void Thing's laughter turned discordant as their lattice began to unravel. They had expected a battle of order against chaos, but instead found themselves facing something they couldn't comprehend. Chaos turned back against itself, randomness made meaningful not through patterns, but through pure, joyful expression. The human ship's formation shifted again, and Sarah recognized the new pattern. They were arranged like the keys of a piano, playing the space between stars like a cosmic instrument. The shadow beasts moved between them like dancers, their bioluminescence creating auroras that sang with colors beyond human comprehension. But just as victory seemed within reach, the Void Things made their final move. Their lattice collapsed inward, concentrating all their entropy-inducing power into a single point, aimed directly at the station's crystalline heart. In that fraction of a second, Sarah understood their true plan. They didn't need to unmake the whole universe. They just needed to erase the moment when humans first heard the shadow beast's seeds. Without that point of contact, this defense would never have existed. Time stretched like taffy as the beast wrapped around her moved with impossible speed. Through their mental link, she felt its decision, felt thousands of years of imprisonment dissolve in a single act of forgiveness and protection. The beast's body intercepted the Void Thing's attack, its bioluminescent patterns flaring brighter than a supernova. But instead of being unmade, it did something that defied every law of physics and biology. It began to sing. Not with patterns of light, not with subsonic rumbles, but with a human voice. With every human voice, every song, every story, every laugh and cry and whispered promise that humanity had ever sent into space, the beast had been collecting them, saving them for this exact moment. The Void Thing's power, designed to do unmake patterns, couldn't erase what had never been a pattern at all. It couldn't unmake the pure, chaotic creativity of an entire species reaching for the stars. The attack reflected back on itself, amplified by the station's crystalline resonance, by the human ship's formation, by the shadow beast's dance through space. Reality trembled, and for a moment, Sarah thought they had lost everything. Then she heard it, a sound she would never be able to describe, as if joy itself had learned to sing. The Void Things didn't explode, didn't dissolve, didn't die. Instead, they began to dance too, their dark matter trails wove into new patterns, no longer seeking to unmake creation, but joining in its endless improvisation. As the last echoes of that impossible psalm faded, Sarah looked around the chamber. The Federation representatives stared in wonder at the shadow beasts, seeing them truly for the first time, not as threats to be contained, but as the artists and preservers they had always been. But it was the beast beside her that held her attention. Its markings had settled into a new pattern, one that combined the mathematical precision of its species with the wild creativity of humanity. Through their link, she felt its satisfaction, its hope, and its amusement. You know, it communicated, humor coloring its mental voice. In all our calculations, in all our preparations, we never considered that the universe might save itself by learning to laugh. Sarah looked at the main viewer, where the void things were still dancing with their former enemies, their dark matter trails painting new constellations across space. She smiled, understanding at last why humanity had been chosen to hear the shadow beast's seeds. Sometimes, she said, the most logical solution is to be completely illogical. High Counselor Zixtel's crystalline form had finally stabilized, reflecting the newfound harmony between order and chaos. Ambassador Chen, they said formally, I believe we need to revise our assessment of humanity's readiness for Federation membership. The beast's markings pulsed with what Sarah now recognized as laughter. Perhaps, it suggested, its mental voice carrying echoes of new possibilities. It's the Federation that needs to prove itself ready for humanity. Above them, the dance of shadows and starlight continued, writing a new song across the cosmos, one that would be heard and sung back for generations to come. But in the deepest darkness between galaxies, something stirred. Something that had been waiting far longer than the void things, something that had orchestrated even this apparent victory. It reached out with thoughts older than time and began to sing its own song. The real test was just beginning. In the days following what historians would later call the Harmony event, the Galactic Council chamber underwent a transformation. Where once crystalline barriers had separated species by rank and influence, now curved bioorganic structures grew in graceful spirals, their surfaces rippling with shadow beast luminescence patterns that translated conversations in real time. Sarah stood at the newly designed speaker's podium, watching representatives from every known species, including a dozen shadow beasts, engaging in animated discussions about art, music, and the nature of reality itself. The feared apex predators had revealed themselves to be philosophers and artists of the highest order, their supposedly aggressive bioluminescence actually a form of living poetry. They're discussing the creation of a new Federation archive. The beast beside her communicated, its mental voice warm with amusement. Sarah had started calling him Atlas, after the ancient human myth of a being who carried the weight of the world. He'd taken to the name with surprising enthusiasm, even adopting a signature pattern of star-like spots across his obsidian scales. An archive of creativity. Sarah nodded, smiling as she watched a group of younger shadow beasts teaching a delegation of mechanoid children how to modulate their power signatures into simple songs, not just storing art and music, but actively combining different species' forms of expression. The void things helped us understand, Atlas projected, his markings shifting into contemplative swirls. Fighting entropy isn't about perfect order or pure chaos. It's about finding beauty in the balance between them. Your species did that instinctively. That's why the seeds chose you. High Counselor Zixtel approached, their crystalline form now permanently altered by exposure to the Harmony event. Fractal patterns danced through their transparent body, creating ever-changing works of abstract art. The last of the bioorganic planetary engines have been reactivated, they announced. The network is complete. Sarah felt a deep satisfaction at those words. The Shadow Beast's original plan had been realized at last, not as a desperate escape route for a chosen few, but as a galaxy-spanning web of creative potential that would prevent entropy from ever again gaining consciousness and purpose. And the signal from intergalactic space, she asked, unable to keep the concern from her voice. They had all felt it in the aftermath of their victory, that ancient song full of dark promise. We're stronger together than we ever were apart, Atlas assured her, his massive form shifting to protectively curve around her shoulders. Whatever's out there, it will find a very different galaxy than the one it expected. One that dances instead of marches, that creates instead of controls. Sarah watched as a young shadow beast attempted to teach our Arthenian representative a complex light pattern, only to create an entirely new form of expression through their shared mistakes. This was the true victory, not just surviving the void things, but learning to thrive in the aftermath, to grow beyond ancient fears and limitations. The Federation Membership Committee has reached a decision, Zixtal announced, their crystalline form pulsing with formal colors. Earth is officially invited to join the Galactic Federation as a founding member. A founding member. Sarah blinked in surprise. But the Federation has existed for thousands of years. We're starting fresh, Zixtal explained, their patterns suggesting both humility and hope. The old Federation was built on fear and control. The new one will be founded on creativity, on the courage to reach across divisions and find harmony in unexpected places. Humanity showed us that way. Atlas's markings shifted into the complex pattern that Sarah had learned meant deep joy. Besides, he projected humor coloring his thoughts. Someone needs to teach the stuffy old council races how to properly dance. Sarah laughed, the sound echoing through the chamber and causing several nearby shadow beasts to pulse their markings in harmony. The sound of human laughter, they had discovered, created ripples in space-time that strengthened the very fabric of reality. As she looked out at the gathered representatives of a changed galaxy, Sarah thought about that dark song from deep space. Whatever ancient force had orchestrated these events, whether testing them or trying to destroy them, had unknowingly created something beautiful, a civilization that had learned to fight entropy with art, to defeat chaos by embracing it, to save everything by daring to express itself. Above the station, shadow beasts and human ships continued their endless dance through the stars, writing new songs across the cosmos. And in the spaces between their movements, in the silence between their notes, reality itself had learned to sing along.